First of all, let me just say thank you, Seattle. Thank you so much to the Citizens Truth Alliance and the 9/11 Visibility Project and everybody else who contributed, who endorsed. I've heard Seattle Thunder mentioned as an endorser. Everybody who had anything to do with this, I want to say thank you very much. I know I and my good friend, my agent publicist, Ken Levine, who made this book happen. He got the publisher, got the deal. Ken, by the way, is the former news director at KCBS Channel 2, the CBS owned and operated TV station in Los Angeles. So we do get defections from time to time. But there's a lot of great people that have put a lot of work into this tonight. And I was listening, I think, to Mike start when Mike was beginning, and he talked about saving the world. And since November the 2nd, we all know what happened on November the 2nd. What has become clear to me, especially, how many people have read the essay on my site called Snap Out of It that had to do with, okay, that's most of you. I would hope that a lot of you, for those of you who have read Crossing the Rubicon or are reading it, or for those of you who are subscribers to From the Wilderness, what I'm going to show you tonight will mean a lot more to you than to the people who are new to this. That doesn't mean that the people who are new to this aren't going to walk away needing a stiff drink, a joint, or a Valium. You know, or whatever makes you feel better. But we will have a lot to talk about. But for me, the issue is no longer about saving the world. The world doesn't want to be saved. Get it? I'm here to save you. I'm here to save anyone who will partake of the information that I and the incredible writers at From the Wilderness, and how many people have read From the Wilderness or looked at my website? God bless you. Well, you're all familiar then with the Jamie Hecks, the Stan Goffs, the Dale Allen Pfeiffers, the Michael Caines, the wonderful, wonderful men and women who tell it like it is and who bring incredible skill to that. But this is no longer about saving the world. This is no longer about having a lefty, progressive, feel-good party and rally and where we can clap and cheer and throw some money at something and go home and think we've done something. I don't know about you, but I spent 27 years of my life trying to change the world, and I've been an abject failure. How well have you done? Okay? That is not to put down on any of us. It is to acknowledge the simple facts of the world that we're living in, and that it is a fundamentally different world, and there is no going back to Kansas with Toto again. Now, inasmuch as I've written this huge book, Crossing the Rubicon, most people think it's a book just about 9/11. If you've read it, you know it's not. It goes way back before the beginning of 9/11 and lays foundations, and it goes well after 9/11, because what I have tried to construct for you is a map, a landscape, a political, economic, energy landscape of the world in which we live, so that you can help, so that you can use that if you read it and use it and study it and incorporate new data into that map to ascertain and divine and map out the terrain upon which you stand. Because the world's about to change in a big way. If we're to look at 9/11, 9/11's like an elephant that's already run over us and it's moving away. Now more than 3 years old, 3.5 years old. Now, what's more important, an elephant that's running away from you or several angry elephants that are running right at you? Which is more important to focus your attention on? So we're going to talk about 9/11, because in talking about 9/11, we're going to talk about how it was perpetrated. Because if you understand the how and the mechanisms by which government, press, the economy, the banking system, the world political landscape were manipulated to produce a 9/11, you will have a clue as to how all of those factors can be manipulated again to produce events that are yet to come, some of which we don't know what they are yet. But it's important to understand how clear-cut the case is, because then we understand that there's an old saying that insanity is repeating the same action over and over again, expecting different results. Make sense? So, you know, let's get past some of these things like, well, I'll write a letter to my congressman, or I'll I'll write the TV station, or I'll stage a protest, or put a bumper sticker on my car. Well, that's to try to change the world. We're here to try to change ourselves and each other. You know, when you're in how many people have taken a commercial airplane flight? Okay, everybody, right? What's the stewardess say when the oxygen mask comes down? Put your own mask on first, because you can't help somebody else if you can't breathe. So what I'm here to do tonight is to help you breathe better in the face of what's coming. Then you can help somebody else, and it will probably be your neighbor, people close to you, physically close to you. We must, I think, at this point, my decision, my knowledge, my belief after almost 30 years of this is that I'm not trying to save my country anymore. My country doesn't exist anymore. But let's go over a little bit of Crossing the Rubicon. Michael Caine, who's a brilliant young writer, he's 28 years old, 29 years old, in New York City. Wonderful guy. He's really into hip-hop, and he kind of came along from the wilderness, and he confronted some generals at the last hearing of the 9/11 Truth Commission. Because Crossing the Rubicon, 600 pages, he said, maybe I can condense this case that Rupert makes against Vice President Cheney down to just some bullet points, and he did. He did a very good job of it. And we just, we'll have this up on the website here in a couple of days. By the way, whenever I do a presentation, I was up till 11 o'clock last night making the fresh slides for this with the freshest possible information. So there's very little here that's canned. This is like up-to-the-minute news. Crossing the Rubicon. In any homicide investigation, and not only did I work narcotics as an investigator with LAPD, I also worked homicide for a short period of time on loan, and I went through their training. In order to establish a murder conviction or homicide conviction, you have to establish means, motive, and opportunity. 3 elements of the crime. Any lawyers in the room tonight? You're brave. I actually saw 2 or 3 hands go up. There's another one up there. Lawyers coming out of the closet. Sounds like a Jackson Browne song. Okay. Means. Dick Cheney and the Secret Service. Right up here. Dick Cheney was the acting commander-in-chief on 9/11, calling the shots via the Secret Service. George Bush was reading about pet goats. George Bush was out of the loop. Where did Cheney go? He was rushed right down to the PEOC, the bunker underneath the White House, Presidential Emergency Operations Center, where the Secret Service had, we have established in Crossing the Rubicon, completely redundant command, control, and communication system with actually better technology in some cases, and we're about to break some major stories showing and proving that my speculation that Vice President Cheney was using modified PROMIS software to override the FAA systems, we're about to break a huge story on that. So the Secret Service has the legal authority to take supreme command over all agencies in the U.S. in times of a national emergency on U.S. soil, even the Air Force. Every agency is subordinate to the Secret Service in what are called national special security events. You can look it up on the web. Secret Service has the highest technological communication systems of any agency, as it should. On 9/11, the Secret Service had the technology to see the FAA radar screens. I found quotes saying that the Secret Service was watching every hijacked plane, all 22 of them at one time, what they thought were 22 of them at one time, on the screens, seeing in real time exactly what the air traffic controllers were seeing. Secret Service was in the decision-making loop as early as 8:15. We placed them in New York City at WTC 7. We placed them in the FAA headquarters at that time, no later than 8:45. Everything was in place on 9/11 for the Commander-in-Chief to have full supreme control of the Air Force and all the military via the Secret Service systems and the legal mandate. Bush was doing his thing about goats. And one of the funniest lines that I got to write in this book, it took me a long time to research, but a year and a half of nonstop back-breaking work to write this book, and there were only a few times where I really got to sit back and just laugh. Remember the story on 9/11, how the first plane, Flight 11, hit the World Trade Center, the North Tower, and then the call came in and the second plane had been hijacked, and the story was that the Secret Service agents came rushing in and grabbed Cheney and carried him down to the bunker. Well, the way I pieced everything together was, you got President Bush reading about a pet goat in a grade school, and his staff there already know about the hijackings. Now somebody's about to put the president on the spot to take command. Now, God knows if George W. Bush had actually taken command on 9/11, we might all be nuclear toast today for his ability to handle things. But my vision came to me as I pieced this together that Dick Cheney got up out of his chair in the White House and ran to the PEOC so that he could assume hands-on control before anybody else could get there. So Bush, they stalled Bush. There was actually a couple of Secret Service agents. Ari Fleischer held up a sign that said, "Don't leave yet." Other Secret Service agents held the president in the school. That's why, because sitting on that stage, he could not take command of anything. He was reading to children. The cameras were on him. He had a perfect excuse, the perfect alibi for not being in command, and that's exactly where Dick Cheney wanted him. Dick Cheney was the acting commander-in-chief, and the Secret Service was the supreme command. Here's the motive for the crime: peak oil. In about 100 years, mankind has used roughly half of all the oil that nature placed on this planet. It's that simple. We'll talk more about that in detail. We have clearly established in crossing the Rubicon with documentary records, not only from the Vice President's Energy Task Force, but from a number of other sources, they're all laid out in the book, that there was clear knowledge that this crisis was coming a long time before 9/11. I know that Dick Cheney knew. That's also established in the book, and of course he came from Halliburton. Once the midpoint is crossed, and all oil production always follows a peak, a bell curve, and once you hit the peak, you come down, and as you're coming down the peak, no matter how much money you throw at the problem, no matter how many more wells you drill, you will never be able to produce more oil than you were at the peak. And we are now probably at peak plus or minus 1 year, maybe 2 years at the most. I'm going to close with that because that's kind of the scariest part. Almost everything in modern society is reliant upon oil. All plastic is made of oil. There are 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food that you eat. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. When a farmer plants a field, he drives a hydrocarbon-powered vehicle to till the soil. Then he comes back along with a hydrocarbon-powered vehicle to plant the seed. Then he has to pump water, irrigation, and how does the electricity get generated? Natural gas or oil or coal. Then he comes along and sprays it with fertilizers. All commercial fertilizers are made from natural gas, the source of ammonia. Then he sprays it with pesticides. All commercial pesticides are made from oil. Then he comes along in a hydrocarbon-powered vehicle again and harvests it, puts it in another hydrocarbon-powered vehicle, drives it to a food processing plant that runs on electricity and throws more chemicals in it, wraps it in plastic, which is oil, throws it into another hydrocarbon-powered vehicle, which drives it to your supermarket, where you walk in, pull out a piece of plastic, also oil, and pay for it. Hydrocarbon energy is diminishing. We eat oil and natural gas. 4 days after becoming vice president, 4 days, Dick Cheney convened his National Energy Policy Development Group, NEPDG, which I believe contains the deepest, darkest secrets of 9/11. And he's refused to release the documents. It became a Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court, well, the Supreme Court, you know, how many people believe that we have a Supreme Court? We have a Republican court, of course, upheld a grossly unconstitutional action because that group was funded by taxpayer dollars that involved private corporations having access to, in secret, to a government-sponsored entity. That's blatantly unconstitutional. Suits were filed. A couple of documents came out. We'll talk about that in a minute. Dick Cheney knew about peak oil as early as 1999. And 9/11 made possible what Dick Cheney called the war that will not end in our lifetimes. I'll never forget watching him say that on television. We are chasing the last remaining hydrocarbon energy reserves around the planet. And this is something I said at From the Wilderness 3+ years ago. And it was a map that we laid out 3+ years ago, and the world is following the map. Now, whether you believe or not that the world is running out of oil, if you are reasonably sane and off your medication, you will have to believe that the world is acting as if peak oil were real. Yes? Yes. Opportunity, means, motive, and opportunity. The war games. We broke these down, and this was, and I have to pay homage to researcher Barbara Honegger, who kept asking me to look at the war games. She didn't quite get how they all work together, but she kept hammering me, and she gave me some great information, and finally I sat down and locked myself in a room for about 2.5, 3 days with the raw data on the war games, and I saw the picture. And I saw what happened on 9/11. In May of 2001, Dick Cheney was placed directly in charge of managing the seamless integration of all training exercises throughout the federal government and military agencies by a presidential directive from the White House. The morning of 9/11 began with a series of what we put in the book of four confirmed hijack drills involving NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and the FAA. And one was Vigilant Guardian, which was a hijack drill. We confirmed through press stories that that drill involved the insertion of false radar blips on radar screens in the Northeast Air Defense Sector. Then another one was Northern Vigilance, scheduled sometime before 9/11, which had moved large numbers of fighter aircraft out of the Northeast Air Defense Sector to Canada and Alaska, anticipating an over-the-pole Soviet attack. Now, for those of us who were my age, I'm 53, we remember the duck and cover drills in high school when the Russians were going to come over the pole and attack. Those are drills from the 60s, the 70s. That drill was scheduled simultaneously with Vigilant Guardian. We also discovered Northern Vigilance, which I have confirmed since the book was published. Somebody read the book and dug up some non-classified documents confirming that more fighters had been moved to Iceland on 9/11, and so they were unavailable to respond. And the bottom line is that when the hijackings, in quotes, occurred on September the 11th, the FAA controllers were looking at their radar screens, and we have on-the-record statements from Jane Garvey of the FAA, among others, that we got 11 possible hijackings, and I confirmed at the time that there were no more than 8 fighters. Now, fighters always fly together. So you've got 11 possible, but one other statement said 22 possible hijackings. That was accounting for some of the false radar injects. Then Richard Clarke comes out with his book, Against All Enemies, this last year. And boy, he left more clues in that book than any detective would ever want to be happy with. But he quoted then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the acting chairman, General Richard Myers, who was now the chairman, as saying, we're in the middle of another exercise called Vigilant Warrior. And I was able to obtain, because of all the 9/11 books that are out there, and there are some good ones out there, I express a lot of confidence in David Ray Griffin's work, and also especially in Paul Thompson's wonderful 9/11 timeline. Paul Thompson has done some amazing work, and those are 2 books that belong in your 9/11 library for sure. But we dug and we looked, but I'm the only guy that has gone out and actually knocked on doors. I mean, I was a detective. And I've done original investigative research. And part of me wanted to do my 9/11 research like Andy Sipowicz from NYPD Blue, where I could throw people around a little bit, and kind of rough them up. But you can't do that with generals and, appointed. So I played Columbo. You got... Now, wait a minute. You got 4 or 5 different exercises going and 22 possible hijack. What idiot scheduled all of these things to happen all on September the 11th? And nobody would tell me. I got as high as a deputy secretary of defense for public affairs. And nobody would tell me. And then I found the paper trail, and it was Dick Cheney, who was running them all on 9/11. So, but the problem is Dick Cheney is not in jail. And if I keep this up, I may soon be. Okay? Will you come visit me if they... Okay, all right. All right. So I got a hold of this Major Don Arias. Really wonderful, a nice guy. My father was Air Force. My mother had been cryptanalyst for Secretary of State Cordell Hull during the Second World War at the Army Security Agency, which was the forerunner of the NSA. My father left the Air Force, went to work for Martin Marietta on Titan 3C, which was the booster for all of the CIA's field spy satellites. Everybody in my family had a clearance. I used to come home from school and say, "What's for dinner?" And Mom would say, "I can't tell you." But I get along good with Air Force people because I was an Air Force brat. So I'm yakking, and I make good friends with this Major Don Arias, who is the public affairs officer at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, which is where the first scramble orders were issued on 9/11. And he was working that day. And he finally sent me an email after I'm asking him those questions and made friends. And he actually confirmed that the live fly exercise, all of the code-named exercises have meanings in the military. They have books by who can use vigilant, who can use warrior, and what the combination of words mean. And he sent me back a written confirmation that the exercise mentioned by General Myers was a live fly hijack drill. Now what that means for you lay people out there is that an Air Force officer from NORAD confirmed to me that NORAD was flying airplanes that were posing as hijacked airliners on September the 11th. You haven't heard anything about that, have you? No, you ought to read the book. It's a good book. An interesting thing about Don Arias. Don Arias has a brother who worked at the World Trade Center. And as I'm piecing together forensically the timelines, as I'm piecing together, and my God, it was mind-breaking work. Ken saw me many times unshaven and disheveled and with kind of the mad scientist look. It occurred to me, and it became very clear, that everybody in the system knew that Flight 175, the second plane to hit the World Trade Center, had been hijacked, and nobody warned the people in the South Tower. And then I found one press account that Don Arias had actually left his post that day to call his brother in the World Trade Center and told him to get out because nobody else was warning anybody. And that was Major Arias's motive for sending me the confirmation. It's a very telling and it's a very heart-rending chapter to read the callousness with which Rudy Giuliani, Dick Cheney, General Ralph Eberhart, General Richard Myers, all of the National Military Command Center staff, and everybody in the PEOC sat there and let the people in the South Tower die because they knew the second plane was coming, and I proved that they knew it was coming, and they just let him die. Now, whoever was coordinating the Air Force war games was under the management direction of Dick Cheney, who was also in charge of another terror drill being set up on the west side of New York. It was a bioterror drill called Tripod 2 being set up on Pier 29 on Manhattan's Lower West Side. And FEMA was already there, and if you read the paper trail that was putting Dick Cheney in charge of all the war game planning back in May, he was coordinating all training, not just in the military, because the FBI, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Centers for Disease Control, et cetera, are not military. So all of that was placed under the aegis or under the umbrella of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration. And FEMA was setting up a complete command post on the morning of September the 11th, just by coincidence, another war game. And that command post was used, as a matter of fact, by one of my several key persons of interest in the attacks of 9/11, Jerome Hauer, who was a bioterror expert connected with about every evil pharmaceutical company you can possibly imagine. But everything led back to one man and one man only, Dick Cheney, in the basement of the White House. Now, there's two separate command centers in the White House. You have the Situation Room upstairs, which is the place from where Richard Clark, Norm Mineta, when he was traveling, but all the government officials were officially doing his work. But there's some interesting quotes in Richard Clark's book, and this is another one that made me laugh, that where Clark keeps saying, you know, I can't figure out why the vice president keeps hanging up on me. Gee. This is a case that I, as a detective, would take to a district attorney tomorrow. I would take Crossing the Rubicon, drop it in the lap of the DA, and I say, I want a filing for murder, premeditated, first degree, multiple counts with special circumstances. Now, we talked briefly about the Energy Task Force, NEPDG. Everybody started fighting their secrecy way back long before 9/11, way back before the first plane hit. Congressman Henry Waxman of California fought very hard. The Sierra Club fought very hard. Judicial Watch fought very hard. Lawsuits were filed. 7 pages of documents finally leaked, just 7, from the NEPDG. And among them was a list of every oil company and every bit of ownership in all the oil fields in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. That's one of the things that we're listing. Basically what they were talking about was, where is all the oil in the world and who do we have to deal with, bribe, kill, or make friends, or blackmail to get it? Now, as you put the maps that came out of NEPDG together, this is a map I constructed from their maps because I had to do a cut and paste overlay, but this is the oil fields they were looking at. Now, I want you to understand something. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is 60% of all the recoverable oil on planet Earth. 60%. If you overlay that into the state of Texas, you see roughly the size of the area. Now, where have we deployed since 9/11? Well, gee, we deployed all around here. We put troops up here in Georgia. We've occupied Iraq. We've got Turkey's part of NATO. We're heavily involved in Israel. Yeah, we've got troops now in Yemen and Djibouti. The British control Oman. We have surrounded 60% of all the oil on the planet. It's consistent with the motive, is it not? And that 60% is going to become very important when you understand that, we'll come to this later on, oil discoveries have been in progressive decline since 1962. There's no more oil to find. I will prove that to you before the night's over, or very little oil left to find. So if that's all there is, that's what you got to get. And whoever gets it eats, and whoever doesn't get it dies, which is going to make Iran all the more critical, which is part of that herd of charging elephants that are descending upon us. Let's go back to May 2001, a critical month, when the NEPDG report was released. America in the year 2001 faces the most serious energy shortage since the oil embargoes of the 1970s. Estimates indicate that over the next 20 years, U.S. oil consumption will increase by 33%, natural gas by well over 50%, and demand for electricity by 45%. U.S. energy consumption is expected to increase by about 32% by 2020. Between 2000 and 2020, U.S. natural gas demand is projected by the Energy Information Administration to increase by more than 50%. Yet we produce 39% less oil today than we did in 1970. 1970 was the year that the United States oil production peaked. We have been in irreversible decline since 1970 within the United States, leaving us ever more reliant on foreign suppliers. On our present course, America 20 years from now will import nearly 2 of every 3 barrels of oil, a condition of increased dependency on foreign powers that, quote unquote, do not always have America's best interests at heart. My response to that is, why the hell should they? These are the war game exercises. Again, part of this, I would encourage you to get the book and read it so that you can understand what happened on 9/11, because you will look ahead for future announcements of war games or anything like war games, and you will look for possible connections or possible patterns developing similar to that. And I want to stress that since the book has been published, I've confirmed 2 more separate war games, all of which were scheduled on September the 11th. I'm going to skip through some of this. This is all, I mean, does anybody doubt that Condoleezza Rice was lying when she said we had no idea that anybody would use a plane to crash as a weapon into a building? Okay. I mean, there were drills for it. The World Trade Center was even set aside as a target. We've confirmed a number of lies. We've confirmed numerous lies and inconsistencies in the Keene Commission report. This is the quote from Richard Clark's book, where he says here, not a pretty picture, Dick. Dick Myers, himself a fighter pilot, knew that the days when we had scores of fighters on strip alert had ended with the Cold War. We're in the middle of Vigilant Warrior, a NORAD exercise, and that's the one where I got the email from Don Arias confirming later that that was a live fly drill. Here's the excerpt from the email that I received from Major Arias. Excerpt of email. NORAD Instruction 33-7, nicknames. It's all mil-speak. A combination of two separate unclassified words which is assigned an unclassified meaning. A nickname is used exclusively to designate a drill or exercise. Exercise terms are used to prevent confusion between exercise directives and actual operations. There's supposed to be a firewall between drills and operation. On 9/11, that firewall did not exist. It was deliberately dismantled by Dick Cheney. Vigilant or amalgam means it is a headquarters NORAD-sponsored exercise. Guardian means it is a multi-command CPX, command post exercise, which means there's no live fly. It's all a tabletop exercise. So on 9/11, NORAD was conducting a NORAD-wide multi-command command post exercise with no live fly. Other exercise terms include Warrior, JCS, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Headquarters NORAD-sponsored field training exercise, live fly. I have that in writing, along with all the email headers showing that that came to me from a United States Air Force officer. That's written confirmation. Now we come to the wonderful 9/11 Commission. How many of you think that the 9/11 Commission did a good job? Okay. We just went through, Michael Caine did this again, and this was the original submissions to the 9/11 Commission from all the evidence, from all the witnesses who had testified for them about the timing of specific events on September the 11th. This is what their final report was, and what that means is that after they'd taken all the testimony, they went into chambers and wrote their report and came out with this whole new list of times, and nobody had ever submitted those times. It's like the judge going into chambers in the middle of a trial, having looked at the evidence from the defense and the prosecution, and the judge walks out with a whole new set of evidence that nobody had walked into court with. And you know what the military said? Gee, thanks, we're glad you straightened us out. We have to get past any illusions here. And what did they say about war games? The only mention of any war game was in a footnote, the 9/11 report. Footnote 116 on 9/11, NORAD was scheduled, and they lied. They said Vigilant Guardian. Vigilant Guardian was the hijacked exercise. It was Northern Vigilance, which was the Soviet drill. So they're trying to confuse you again by lying. I have the original records showing what the drills were. So they lied even in a footnote to the report. Now, many skeptics out there, excuse me, many people out there who love to attack us conspiracy theorists. I don't deal in conspiracy theory, I deal in conspiracy fact. Say that it's impossible to have a conspiracy of this size with thousands of people knowing and somebody would have talked. And my answer is, you bozos, you buy it, the line every time, don't you? How many people have ever heard of the Manhattan Project? Manhattan Project, you know, the first atom bomb? Well, there were tens of thousands of people involved in that, and that secret didn't leak until the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, did it? How many people have heard of the F-117A stealth fighter? Gee, that was a secret for a long time. Thousands of people involved in that. That didn't leak until they finally announced it. Of course, they crashed a few and all that stuff, but people didn't really know what it was. And it's all dealt with, and I come from that milieu. I was raised in that milieu, and I worked, you know, the CIA tried to recruit me because of my family background when I was a cop. But I mean, I grew up knowing about compartment. I had a Q clearance because I lived in the same house with my parents. I'm serious, because my dad might have left his briefcase open. You deal with that by compartmentalization. A guy mining some uranium ore in Tennessee wouldn't have any idea that he was doing it for an atom bomb. A guy mixing epoxy resin wouldn't have any idea that it was to create a radar-proof paint or adhesive to go on the outside of a stealth fighter. And what you do need are certain key people in key locations who do know at least most of or a significant part of in a secret compartmentalized intelligence, SCI, that's an official term, operation. And I found several, but this is my favorite of all the ones in 9/11. Dave Frasca, who was head of the Radical Fundamentalist Unit, he stepped on 5 separate investigations, each one of which could have prevented the attacks. 5. He stepped on, there was an investigation of 2 of bin Laden's relatives in early 2001. The White House issued an order which he then put out to the field saying, stop investigating these 2 brothers of Osama bin Laden who were living in Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters. That's a clue. That's a clue. Chicago agent Robert Wright, heartbreaking press conference where he cried and apologized to the people he had penetrated al-Qaeda financing. Dave Frasca took away his computers, sent him down to the basement where water pipes were dripping on his desk. You should have heard of the Phoenix memo circulated by Kenneth Williams that was suppressed about all the guys taking flight training. And by the way, we'll deal with the hijackers briefly when I tell you that 7 of them are still alive, according to BBC and ABC and Newsday and major press sources. I believe the planes were flown by remote control. And I believe that at least 5 to 7 of them, we know that 5 had received training at U.S. military facilities. That came from Newsweek magazine. And so some of them, I think, were government agents who were still alive. And the others were cannon fodder. The others, they call them the muscle guys. I think they all died on the airplanes that were being flown. Interesting now, we just had Donald Rumsfeld leak, slip of the tongue, that Flight 93 was shot down. Well, I proved that 93 was shot down. I think what happened was the passengers broke into the cockpit and found out there was nobody there. Now, what are you going to do then? You got to kill everybody on board, because how are you going to explain that? The Phoenix memo was sat on by Dave Frasca. Then Colleen Rowley, Time Magazine's Woman of the Year in 2003, remember her? Well, see, she was the one in Minneapolis who was, saying, how come that FBI headquarters is, they're suppressing our investigation. They won't let us into this computer. We know what's in here. Do we have to wait for Osama bin Laden to crash a plane into the World Trade Center? I mean, and yet she had Zacarias Moussaoui in custody. And Dave Frasca had completely destroyed that investigation. Then we have Carnivore intercepts of email, which is an email intercept program, very sophisticated technology, also tied to Promise Software, where they can intercept all your emails. And they do it with some really great word recognition technology and so forth. But they had a warrant. And this FBI agent walks in on this big warrant where they have all this take. That's the intelligence term. It's the raw data is the take. And he saw that in the midst of these tens of thousands of emails, or 5,000 emails, about al-Qaeda and terrorist suspects and people wanting to blow up the U.S., there was an email from some Mary Johnson in Denver, Colorado. And according to the official story, the FBI agent was so upset that this innocent civilian had had her privacy violated that he destroyed all 5,000 emails. Now, look, I know a little bit about the FBI. First of all, the FBI never destroys anything. And the FBI was already into Zacarias Moussaoui's computer. They knew what was there, and they knew, because the FBI only needs a warrant to get evidence into court. But the FBI has been doing black bag jobs since J. Edgar Hoover bought his first dress. Kenny just wrinkled his brow over that one. So, the FBI could give a hoot about somebody's civil liberties. But Dave Frasca was in charge of that too. Now, what happened to Dave Frasca after 9/11? He got promoted. Okay. Remember that first elephant with the 9/11 across its butt? That's 9/11. It's over. We all took our best shot. I took my best shot. Now, my book is still out there, but when I say I took my best shot, I mean that in terms of maybe having somebody in government come to senses, a trial, an indictment, an impeachment. Of course, I don't believe anything like that. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now, there's other elephants coming at us now in the wake of 9/11. But if you read Crossing the Rubicon, you get how these guys work and how they think. I started the first part of the book with detailed emphasis on what? Economics. Did I not? How many people here read the book? Because you've got to understand how money works. Unless and until you change the way money works, you will change nothing. And of course, it may be too late for that anyway. If you were to take a dollar bill out of your wallet and hold it in your hand, and a little glass of crude oil in the other hand. Now, what does the dollar bill represent? If you distill it down, it represents the ability to do something, right? To do work. To buy gasoline for your car, to drive your car, to buy a house, to take an airplane ticket, to buy food, to whatever. It represents oil is the ability to do work. Money has no value without oil. Von Clausewitz, who said, talked about the fog of war, said that war is a continuation of politics by other means. If he was right about that, then politics is a continuation of economics by other means. And economics is a continuation of energy by other means. You keep looking for the root of the root of the root. We come back to oil. All oil production always follows a bell curve. This is one field. And, let's say, back Giant, the movie Giant with Montgomery Clift. Was it Montgomery Clift? And Elizabeth Taylor and whoever. James Dean. Okay. So they drill a well, and the guys are getting showered in the oil and we're rich. Well, that's what happens when you drill this first well. It's all under pressure. Now, reservoirs are not like a glass because it's sedimentary rock, and it's source rock, and sometimes it's more porous and less porous, and there's all kinds of geologic factors that come into play, but the pressure goes down, but you drill more wells and your production goes up, and eventually the level goes down and you pass this peak and you come down. And that applies whether it's an oil field, the oil in one country, or the oil on planet Earth. The model is the same. Oil discoveries peaked in 1962. We now use 4.2 something barrels of oil for every new barrel of oil that is found, and the gap is getting bigger every year. In 2003, there was not a single discovery of a mega field. Now, mega field sounds big, doesn't it, right? Mega, big, right? Like Schwarzenegger, mega field. 500 million barrels in a mega field, right? The world uses 1 billion barrels of oil every 11½ days. In 2003, we didn't find a single field with 500 million barrels. That's a clue. Oil discoveries are way off. So there was a great prophetic scientist by the name of M. King Hubbert who predicted way back in the 50s that the peak of U.S. oil production would come in 1950. They damn near burned him at the stake. I know, I've been close to that a couple of times. And you know what? He was right. So he used the same model to predict a world oil peak somewhere between 2000 and 2010, 2012, based upon consumption. Now, these are creaming curves here, which show actual use. This was the predicted model curve, which shows a peak just shortly after here. But you can see that the creaming curves are all skewed this way. This is hydrocarbon production. This is world population. This is hydrocarbon production per capita. And hydrocarbon production per capita actually peaked on planet Earth in 1979. But notice what happens here, which is what all the ecologists like my dear friend Richard Heinberg and all the great writers who have talked about peak oil calls overshoot, where the population and the demand overshoot the ability to produce and sustain the population. This is the model that is applying to world events right now. From the Wilderness, my newsletter has been active on peak oil since right after 9/11. I have an incredible science editor Dale Allen Pfeiffer, who was a geologist, who has done some of the most amazing prophetic writing. He has been right so far ahead of the curve. I mean, and I'll show you some examples later on. But finally, on October 1 of last year, when I say we did it, I don't mean from the wilderness, because there are a great many people who were there on peak oil before I was. Colin Campbell, Richard Duncan, Walter Youngquist from Eugene, Oregon, Kenneth DeFays, many other people active in many, many groups around the world. But we did it because, on October 1st, the G7 group of nations issued a joint statement saying we have no idea how much oil is really left. And we need to find out. Now that was after Shell had downgraded its reserves 3 times in 1 year. Now, let me talk briefly about reserves before we move on. Oil companies trade their stock on Wall Street. They raise money that way. If I'm BP Amoco and I discover a field with 600 million barrels of oil, and I announce that all in 1 year, I have to pay taxes on 600 million barrels of oil all in 1 year. Do I want to do that? No. So I say I found 100 million barrels this year, 100 million barrels this year, 100 million barrels this year, and that gives the false illusion from an accounting standpoint that more oil is being discovered in old fields. It's pure accounting hodgepodge. It's hocus pocus. Secondly, the more oil that I state, there are many different levels of reserves. There's proven reserves, there's estimated reserves, ultimately recoverable reserves, all of which are accounting terms. And we even found that Dale Pfeiffer was digging through a report from the Energy Information Administration about reserves that it says are in the ground. And there was a little footnote. You got to read the footnote sometimes. It's a pain in the ass, but it really pays off. Because the footnote said the Energy Information Administration adjusts estimated reserves based upon anticipated demand. What? Huh? Anybody see this last June? All right, let me plant a thought in your mind before we go on here. I get asked this question more often than any other question. And what it reflects to me is not so much ignorance as the fact that you, like me, like every victim out here who has been conditioned by television and radio and National Public Radio and, all of this mind control that's out there, we have been conditioned not to think critically. And probably the single most important question I'm asked, the single most frequent question I'm asked is, hey Mike, now you can fill in the blank anything you want to. What if the aliens come tomorrow with this whole great new technology? We'll be saved. Okay. Or what about hydrogen? Hydrogen is an insult, a chimera of the most evil kind. Okay. What about zero-point energy? Been demonstrated in the laboratory. Right. Now, so let's assume that tomorrow there's a brand new technology. Will that brand new technology work in your 1996 Toyota Tercel? No. There are 700 million internal combustion powered vehicles on planet Earth. Each one of those vehicles, according to a couple studies we found, takes on the average between 12 and 15% of all the oil it will ever use in its lifetime just to make. Ah, who had it? All right, I love you. Would you like a cigarette? You read this article here. You've got to make 700 million new vehicles, and that article alone tells you there are 7 gallons of oil in every tire. Now, how are you going to get the minerals out of the ground, build the new factories? That's all hydrocarbon energy. You got to transport them, you got to melt them, you got to generate electricity, move them down, you got to make the paints out of oil, you got to wire the vehicles, that's plastic, you got to... Do you understand that it's a no-win solution? Professor David Goodstein of the California Institute of Technology wrote a great book. Says very clearly it takes 30 years to change an energy infrastructure. 30 years. We haven't even dealt with the infrastructure issues. Some of the mainstream stories that have acknowledged peak oil, ABC News. This just came out from MIT just 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Major oil headlines in the last year. National Geographic, BBC, Interpress News Agency, Moscow Times, Jane's Defense Weekly, Jane's Intelligence Review, one of the most respected publications on the planet. Foreign Policy in Focus, ABC News, the Sunday Times, that's of London. The Economist, I use them a lot, BBC, US News, Asia Time, Foreign Affairs, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Associated Press, Radio Free Europe, that's the CIA, folks. The Korea Times, Knight Ridder newspapers, CNN, okay? It's coming out, all right? Peak oil is real. It cannot be denied. Although the mainstream media does a wonderful job of like mentioning it but saying, don't worry about it. We're handling it. That's what scares the shit out of me. They're handling it. This just came, there's a friend of mine, Adam Porter, who is a British guy, writes now for Al Jazeera. He used to be a big writer in England, and I wrote when he published a magazine there called Zero. And I wrote for him when he was there. Now he writes for Al Jazeera because he can get the truth out at Al Jazeera. The Al Jazeera English website's actually a damn good site. So he wrote this. Now, here's just a little clue as to what they're hiding, and this is what From the Wilderness does, is that, yeah, the mainstream media lies, but they have to tell the truth because there are actually people who make decisions who read them, and they know kind of where to look and how to read it. Look at this down here. This is Britain. He's writing about Britain. High fuel costs spell winter tragedy. British government, British government, British government, British government. In the UK, up to 52,000 pensioners die during a cold winter. They are classified as excess deaths. That's because Great Britain is running out of energy. The North Sea is in complete decline. There's very little natural gas. 50,000 people may freeze to death in Great Britain this winter because there's no energy, not enough. And it's going to happen here. How many people heat their homes with natural gas? Well, it's like you don't want to admit it. It's like, how many people are gay? I'll get more hands raised than I would. How many people heat with that? Okay, how many people here think, oh no, I don't heat with natural gas, I heat with electricity, that's different. Hey, where do you think the electricity comes from? They burn that. Okay, some of it's hydro, but for most of the country it's natural gas or coal. Here's an interesting quote. And this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is how I might present to you absolute proof that peak oil is real. Quote, if the actions rather than the words of the oil business's major players provide the best gauge of how they see the future, then ponder the following. Crude oil prices have doubled since 2001, but oil companies have increased their budgets for exploring new oil fields by only a small fraction. Likewise, U.S. refineries are working close to capacity, yet no new refinery has been constructed since 1976. And oil tankers are fully booked, but outdated ships are being decommissioned faster than new ones are being built. Is that logical? It is logical only if you understand that the oil companies know that there's no more oil to find and they'll never get a return on investment if they keep building new ships and new refineries that are never going to get paid for. Does that make sense? Here's really scary. ACOR, right here. The American Council on Renewable Energy just had a meeting, this is December 14th, in Washington, and basically what the thrust of this story was, if one actionable priority could be distilled from the chorus of support expressed for renewables, that's wind, solar, all the warm, fuzzy, progressive stuff we like, which I like, which is great. Problems with it, we'll get there in a minute. Of the American Council on renewable energy. It's that the time has come to shift the nation's priorities from an era of research and development to one of major deployment. Now, wait a minute. I grew up and my father was doing work for Martin Marietta on the Titan 3C and other kind of super top secret projects. R&D was the big word. Deployment meant you put it in the field now. And what this whole article says is that renewables have not been anywhere close to perfected, refined. The technology doesn't exist. The infrastructure doesn't exist to make them replace oil. But what the story says is if you don't put whatever you got in the field now, we're done anyway. That's very scary. And you know who one of the big guys in this whole operation is? A guy by the name of James Woolsey. I think he's mentioned here on this page. You know who James Woolsey was? Bill Clinton's first director of Central Intelligence. This is riddled with intelligence people. And what they said was basically, stop trying to make your solar better, stop trying to make your windmills better, stop trying to just get it out now. Woolsey is really scary because he's really involved in something I read about in Discover magazine called thermal depolymerization. And you read the story, it is a non-scientific story because they don't talk about something called net energy, how much energy you have to put into something versus how much you get out. But Woolsey was really behind this thermal depolymerization, which is some kind of a machine where you can throw in animal waste, animals, and come out with oil. And this article actually said in Discover magazine, which is Disney, that if you throw in a 175-pound man, you'll come out with 30 liters of high-quality oil. And James Woolsey is behind this. Soylent oil. I mean, give me a break.